She walked into his office, smiling like a stranger. But the moment he saw her, he knew everything was about to fall apart. She walked into his office like any other applicant, calm, professional, and utterly unaware that the man seated behind the glass desk had once rewritten her entire life from the shadows. Leon Ashford didn't remember how to breathe. The moment the elevator chimed and her heels tapped against the marble floor, he knew. Knew in a way that broke the carefully constructed boundaries he'd spent 12 years defending. He looked up from his monitor, expecting a stranger. Instead, he saw her. Not the girl from that night. Not the one sobbing in a corridor outside the emergency trauma ward, clutching a bloodied hoodie and begging someone, anyone, not to take her brother away. No, that version of her was gone. This version? She was a woman now. Poised. Controlled. The kind of compose that doesn't come naturally. It's earned, shaped by fire and fallout. Her hair, chestnut and sleek, was pinned at the nape in a style that screamed competence. No earrings, no necklace, just a navy blouse, high-waisted slacks, and an aura of sharpened self-reliance. She moved like someone who no longer believed anyone would catch her if she fell, and had made peace with that. She extended her hand across the table. Mr. Ashford? Her voice was still soft, still unmistakably hers. He stood slowly, because his legs didn't quite respond at first. His palm met hers, and time slipped. "I'm here for the assistant position," she said, her tone clipped, polished. He barely nodded. "Thank you for coming." And just like that, she sat, without waiting for permission. She opened a black leather folder and began speaking with the detached efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times before. "I've attached references to HR, but I brought a hard copy. 2 years as an operations and research assistant. Before that, intake coordinator at a nonprofit health clinic. I've managed executive scheduling, contracts, and high-volume correspondence. And I'm fluent in written and spoken French." Every word was clean, curated, professional. But Leon wasn't hearing the resume. He was hearing echoes. He was hearing the way her voice cracked when she'd screamed her brother's name. He was seeing the red light above the operating room flicker to green as hospital staff removed Drew Blake's body. He remembered the hallway form. Her name scribbled in panicked penmanship. Eden, age 15, no immediate guardian. She'd been transferred by child services within hours. To another state, another school. Then nothing. But hadn't been nothing. Leon had followed every paper trail, funded every transfer, paid for therapy under a false charitable trust. When she changed her last name, he made sure no one ever asked why. It wasn't charity. It wasn't even atonement. It was the only thing left he could do, protect her from the truth. Because if she ever found out what Drew died trying to reveal and what Leon didn't stop, she'd never forgive him. She was speaking again. "And your name?" he asked, even though his throat burned with the answer. She paused just slightly. "Eden Blake," she replied, as if the name belonged to someone she'd chosen to become, not someone she'd always been. Her eyes met his again. Calm, steady. But beneath that calm, he saw it. The quiet storm. The strength forged in silence. And her smile, the smallest curve at the edge of her mouth, was the kind of smile you only wear when you've walked through hell and built a home in its ashes. Later that night, Leon stood at his penthouse window, the city lights below flickering like nerve endings. She didn't know who he was. Didn't know that he was the anonymous benefactor who made her new life possible. Didn't know her brother once worked for Ashford Corp. Didn't know he died trying to bring something dark into the light. And she sure as hell didn't know that the man sitting across from her today had buried more than just Drew's file. Leon exhaled, forehead against the cool glass. She wasn't here looking for him, but fate had brought her anyway. And as much as he wanted to believe this could stay professional, he knew better. Because the truth wasn't just behind them, it was beneath them, pulsing like a landmine. And if she ever stepped on it, he wouldn't be able to protect her from the fallout. Not this time. Leon Ashford had spent his entire adult life ensuring no one could surprise him. He'd built an empire through precision, strategy, control. But no contingency plan had prepared him for her showing up in his office with a folder, a smile, and 12 years of unknowingly carried ghosts. He didn't sleep that night. Not because of guilt. He'd lived with that for over a decade. But because for the first time in years, he didn't know what the right move was. He'd kept her safe. That was the point. An unspoken promise. No contact. No interference. Only lifelines. Invisible ones. Anonymous tuition grants hidden behind shell charities. Housing assistance. Therapy funding slipped through nonprofit subsidies. A legal name change facilitated through a lawyer who never asked questions. He'd constructed a path for her so carefully, so silently. He had almost believed she'd never stumble into his world again. And then she walked through his door. The next morning, he opened her digital file with hands that didn't shake, but almost did. Edam Bulik. Age, 24. New identity, clean record. Ivy League scholarship. Academic excellence. Perfect evaluations. 2 years in nonprofit admin. A trail of competence and discipline. But that wasn't what stopped him. It was the last document in her HR file. One that hadn't been uploaded by any recruiter. Ashford Legacy Grant. Recipient number 01. A line item he hadn't seen since the early days of the foundation. He clicked it, and there it was. First tuition deposit. Age 16. Relocation housing coverage. Age 18. Therapy continuation. Years 18 to 22. Legal name change authorization. Signed via Ashford Holdings. She never knew who signed those forms. That was the point. That was always the point. She wasn't supposed to owe him anything. Wasn't supposed to feel owned, or obligated, or watched. She was supposed to have a clean slate, one her brother never got. And now, she had returned. Not because she'd discovered the truth, but because life, cruel and cyclical as it was, had brought her to the place where everything had gone wrong. She had applied to work at Ashford Corp., the same company Drew once worked for, the same company he died trying to expose. Leon could have stopped it. One call to HR, one vague note, position filled. But instead, he pressed accept. She arrived 2 days later. Early. Always early. No muck-up. Simple heels. A dark gray notebook tucked under one arm. Not a trace of hesitation in her steps. She didn't recognize him. Not even a flicker. She passed his desk with a soft, "Morning, Mr. Ashford," and settled into the assistant station outside his door like she'd always belonged there. He didn't respond. Not really. A nod, maybe. A clipped "thank you." But the weight of her presence changed everything. It wasn't loud. It wasn't disruptive. It was steady, like a heartbeat. She didn't make mistakes. Didn't fumble. Didn't ask for direction twice. By the end of the week, she was indispensable. Calls routed, meetings aligned, investor decks streamlined, NDAs processed before he asked. She handled global correspondence and overseas travel with the grace of someone who had once learned order as a means of survival. But it wasn't her skills that disturbed him. It was how familiar she felt, how easily she adapted to his rhythms, even the ones he didn't think she noticed. She never hovered near his back. She gave him space in tense negotiations. She brought him black coffee in the middle of long meetings, always precisely 1 sugar. She never commented when his eyes lingered too long on the office wall where Drew's name still sat, quietly engraved under founding partners. She didn't ask about her brother, but she lingered in the places his memory lived, like she was listening for an echo. One night, while past business hours, Leon emerged from a call with investors in Tokyo to find her still in the hallway. She wasn't working. She was staring at a photograph, a black and white shot mounted in glass. Ashford Corp., 2009. The founding 5, shoulder to shoulder. Smiles forged from ambition. Drew Blake stood third from the left. His arm was slung around Leon's shoulders like a brother. Leon approached carefully. "You recognize someone?" She didn't flinch, just nodded, her eyes still locked on the frame. "I had a picture once. Just me and him. He hated taking them." Her voice caught slightly, but he kept that one. Said he liked how real he looked in it. Leon swallowed hard. "He was a good man," he said. Quiet. Measured. "You knew him?" she asked. Leon's pause was too long. Briefly. It was the first lie. She didn't press him. Didn't ask follow-up questions. But her posture shifted. Not suspicious. Not yet. But watching. Like she was collecting puzzle pieces. Leon returned to his office that night with a new weight on his chest. Because it was becoming clear, she wasn't just there for a job. She was searching for something. Maybe a sense of justice. Maybe closure. Maybe the part of herself still trapped in the hallway of that hospital 12 years ago. And sooner or later, she was going to find the one thread that unraveled everything he'd worked so hard to bury. The silence between them had evolved. It wasn't awkward. That would have been easier. It was precise, the kind of silence forged between two people who spoke fluently in restraint, who both understood what not saying something cost. By the second week, Eden had become more than efficient. She was essential. Leon didn't even remember approving her permanent hire. HR handled it swiftly, as they did all things when he didn't object. But now she was there every morning before sunrise, keying in codes before the security team had fully clocked in. She mapped his preferences like muscle memory. Black coffee, no cream. Water bottles at room temperature, never chilled. No personal calls during overseas briefings. No one stood behind him while he reviewed old contracts. Ever. She never asked why, but she noticed. And that was the part that undid him most. She noticed everything, not just his habits, but the fragility inside them. She'd never seen the office as a sanctuary. That much was clear. Her boundaries were surgical, firm without arrogance. But Leon saw it in the way her fingers tightened slightly when she passed framed awards. The way she blinked once, slowly, whenever someone mentioned the company's legacy. She wasn't just here to work. She was observing the bones of something. The fourth time she paused in front of the Ashford-Holloway merger timeline, Leon pretended not to see her run her fingers along the engraved dates. The same year Drew died. The same year she vanished. Leon watched her from his doorway, a file clutched in one hand. She didn't turn. Didn't need to. The way her shoulders squared said enough. She remembered something. Or was starting to. Later that night, Leon found himself standing in the records room, the one no one used anymore. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, archive contracts, non-digitized filings that hadn't seen daylight since the company's early days. He opened the drawer marked Internal Memos, 2011 Q3. And there it was, Drew's signature, the last internal complaint he filed before his death. Redacted, sealed, suppressed under executive override. Leon had signed that override, not because the complaint wasn't valid. But because the board panicked, because the fallout would have gutted Ashford Corporation, because silence, in that moment, seemed like the lesser evil. Now that silence had a face. Eden, she brought Leon his coffee the next morning, setting it down with the same measured grace she used for everything. But her eyes flicked to the door, the one leading to his private study, for just a second too long. And he saw it. She was wondering why her brother's name never came up, why the company files seemed to skip over his existence, why she remembered Drew coming home late from meetings, always quieter, always tired, and why no one had ever told her what really happened. The worst part? He could have told her. Right then, in that moment, he could have cleared the air, owned the truth, faced the fire. But Leon had lived long enough to know one thing. Truth doesn't set you free. It burns everything down first. And Leon had already buried one family under that fire. He couldn't risk burying her too. Instead, he did what cowards disguised as protectors always do. He said nothing. Later that day, she passed him a memo for his signature. Her fingers brushed his, just briefly. And in that moment, Leon realized something far worse than guilt. He was beginning to care. Not as a mentor. Not as a former friend of her brother. Not even as the man who once paid to erase her past and rebuild her future. But as a man who could no longer imagine walking into that office and not seeing her there. He looked at her when she walked away. The line of her spine, the echo of grief she still wore like perfume, faint but permanent. And it hit him. If she ever found out the truth, she wouldn't just leave. She'd hate him. And somehow that was worse. The following Monday began like any other. Morning light spilled through the office windows. Phones buzzed. Meetings cycled. The machine of Ashford Corp moved forward. But Eden felt it. A shift. A pull in the air, like something just beyond her reach had tilted out of place. It started with the file. A logistics memo tucked into a folder Leon had signed without looking. She caught it as she was scanning through post-merger data, her old habit of proofreading everything before final archive. Date, July 12, 2011. Her pulse slowed. That date wasn't just familiar. It was burned into her memory. The day Drew died. She stared at the footer, Ashford Internal Memo, Operations, Unit H. Unit H. She didn't know what that meant. She hadn't thought of that name in years. But she remembered her brother mentioning it once, near the end. Whispered frustration in the kitchen of their old apartment. They're hiding numbers in Unit H, he'd said. Someone's laundering through it, Eden. If anything happens to me. She thought it was paranoia. Now, the phrase was here, hidden in plain sight, buried in a post-merger logistics memo 12 years later. She printed it quietly and slid it into the back of her notebook. That afternoon, Leon was unusually quiet. His responses clipped, his meetings shorter. He kept glancing toward the hallway where the old partner photos still hung, as if expecting one of them to whisper secrets they took to the grave. Eden watched him without meaning to, not because she was suspicious, not yet, but because her instincts were lighting up in ways she couldn't ignore. Later, while organizing archived expense reports, she noticed another oddity. 2 contracts from 2011 with identical project codes, but wildly different financials. One was clean. The other was flagged void, bore discretion. Both bore Drew Blake's initials in margin notes, and Leon Ashford's signature at the bottom. Her heart ticked louder. She didn't believe in coincidence. Not when it came to numbers. Not when it came to her brother. By 7 p.m., the office had emptied, except for her. And Leon. He didn't ask her to stay late. She didn't offer, but something unspoken kept them tethered to the same quiet floor, separated by glass, secrets, and the weight of what neither had yet said out loud. She was halfway through sorting an old tax audit when her hand froze over a familiar header. Ashford Discretionary Grant Program, 2011 seed list. Her eyes scanned the names, and there it was. Recipient number 01, Eden S. B. The last name was smudged, but her old address was clear. So was the timestamp, approved exactly 1 month after Drew's death. She stared at it for a long time. She had never applied for a grant. She'd never even known this fund existed. Who submitted it? Why was it approved so fast? Why did the paper trail start the same month her world collapsed? The hallway lights buzzed above her. Somewhere beyond the glass, she could see Leon's silhouette, standing by his window, one hand resting on the frame like he was bracing for something. She didn't knock. She returned to her desk, opened her notebook, and slid the copied memo inside. Then, almost instinctively, she whispered aloud, a single sentence that chilled even herself to hear. "What are you hiding from me?" She didn't know if she meant Leon, or the company, or the ghost of her brother's last unfinished warning. But she was no longer just curious. She was starting to suspect, and suspicion, in a place like Ashford Corp., was a spark in a powder room. Leon had always known this day would come. He didn't know when or how, but the moment Eden stepped into his office, he felt the countdown begin. A clock he couldn't stop ticking, a truth too heavy to carry much longer. It started small, a misplaced file, a copy missing from the archive log. Then, late that Thursday, he passed the storage corridor and saw the faint glow of a desk lamp still on. She was sitting on the floor, cross-legged, sleeves rolled up, surrounded by boxes no one had opened in years. "Working late?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. She didn't flinch, just looked up with that same, unreadable calm. "Some of the old mergers didn't digitize correctly," she said. "Figured I'd backfill the system." He nodded, stepping inside, but his eyes fell on the folder in her lap, and his stomach turned. Unit H, 2011. She wasn't just working. She was digging. He tried not to panic. Not visibly, but something in him twisted. "You won't find much in those," he said casually. Most of Unit H was absorbed into internal restructuring by Q4. She tilted her head. "You remember that off the top of your head?" Leon forced a soft chuckle. "I signed most of it. Hard to forget." Eden didn't smile, didn't blink, just nodded once and closed the folder. She didn't ask the question he could see forming behind her eyes. Why were you involved? Why are your initials on every page Drew flagged before he died? She wouldn't ask it. Not yet. But the moment was coming. And Leon knew the worst part. He was going to lie when it did. Because the truth, it would wreck her. And if it wrecked her, it would destroy the only thing he had left of Drew Blake. Later that night, Leon poured himself a drink in the silence of his penthouse. Whiskey neat. No ice. He sat by the window, watching the city blur beneath him. 12 years ago, Drew had trusted him, believed Leon would take the evidence to the board, expose the offshore funnel, the ghost contracts, the shell core hiding inside Unit H. But Leon hadn't. He'd frozen, watched the company stall, watched the board circle its wagons. He'd been too afraid of what the exposure would cost, not to him, but to everyone else. Ashford Corp would have crumbled. Thousands of jobs, partnerships, stocks. So when Drew took into his own hands, leaked internal flags to a third-party journalist, Leon had tried to stop the fallout quietly. Too quietly. And then Drew had died. A late-night car accident. Officially labeled non-suspicious. But Leon had always known better. He'd buried the truth that day. Not just Drew's file, but part of himself. Now Eden was in the ashes, and she was beginning to realize they didn't match the fire she'd been told. He turned the glass in his hand and whispered a question he hadn't asked aloud in years. Would he forgive me for keeping her in the dark? Eden had always trusted her instincts. They'd been sharpened early, first by grief, then by necessity. By the time she was 16, she'd learned to read people faster than they read her name off a file. And right now, every instinct was screaming the same thing. Leon Ashford was hiding something. Not in the way guilty people hide things. He was too controlled, too precise. He didn't avoid her eyes. He didn't stutter or flinch. He didn't panic, but it was in his pauses, in the way his jaw tightened when Drew's name surfaced in old files, in the way he always seemed to know which records not to touch, which doors not to open, which memories she was quietly chasing. He never told her not to look. He just watched and waited, like he was timing a detonation only he could disarm. So she stopped asking questions around him and started asking them elsewhere. Her first move was subtle. She submitted a request to HR for legacy employee photos, part of a communications revamp, she claimed. Then she scanned the internal database for anyone still on payroll from 2011. Only 6 names surfaced. One stood out, Charles Avery, former analyst, now an external auditor for a subsidiary branch in Tribeca. He was the last person Drew emailed before the crash, and according to archived email threads, the only one who never replied. Eden didn't wait. She took an early lunch and caught the next rideshare downtown, notebook in hand, pulse steady. Tribeca buzzed with high-end cafes and boutiques, but the Ashford satellite office was cold and corporate, all glass and stone. She found Avery in the 4th-floor break room, sipping tea like a man who'd long outlived ambition. Mr. Avery, she asked softly. He looked up, frowned. Do I know you? I work under Leon Ashford, she said. I'm Drew Blake's sister. The mug slipped slightly in his hand. He caught it, but not before she saw the tremor. Sit, he muttered, pulling out the chair beside him. She did, and for a long moment, neither of them said a word. Then, without prompting, Avery began to speak. I told him not to go public, he said. Told him the board wouldn't protect him, that they'd protect the company. Always. You mean the Unit H leak, Eden said quietly. Avery nodded once. He found something, not just financial corruption, but off-record acquisitions. Fund transfers buried in compliance noise. They called it an optimization strategy. It was fraud, plain and simple. And Leon? She asked, afraid of the answer. Avery hesitated. Wasn't the worst of them, he said finally. But he didn't stop it either. Drew begged him to push it to legal. Leon stalled, delayed, said he'd handle it internally. Then Drew died. Eden whispered. Avery didn't respond, just looked at her, and for the first time his voice softened. I saw your brother the day before it happened. He looked scared, not for himself, for you. Her throat tightened. He told me he was setting up a fallback, that if anything happened to him, he made sure you'd be okay. Said Leon owed him that much. Eden's pulse slowed. What do you mean? But Avery shook his head. I don't know what he meant. He left. Next day, gone. Crash on the Belt Parkway. Police said it was rain and speed. She stood slowly, heart heavy. I needed to know if he died fighting for the right thing. Avery looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw real regret in his eyes. He did. Eden nodded once, then turned to leave. But as she reached the elevator, her phone buzzed. One new message from Leon Ashford. Where are you? Just 3 words. But somehow, they felt heavier than everything she'd just learned. Eden stared at the message. 3 words, calm on the surface, loaded underneath. Her grip tightened around the phone. He knew, not everything, not yet, but enough to feel her slipping away. She didn't reply, just grabbed her coat, left the cafe, and walked straight into the storm she'd been circling for days. By the time she returned to the office, the hallway outside his door was empty. No interns, no noise, just the soft hum of lights and the scent of cologne drifting faintly from his half-open door. She walked in. Leon was seated at his desk, hands folded, eyes unreadable. The moment he saw her, he stood, not out of courtesy, out of tension. Where were you? He asked, voice level. Eden stepped forward calmly. Lunch. With your notebook? His gaze dropped to the edge of the leather-bound journal still tucked under her arm. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to her side of the desk and sat. Not defensively, just choosing not to engage. Leon exhaled through his nose and stepped closer. I know you've been pulling files. That made her pause. You left traces in the legacy archive. Old drawers. System pings. You've been in records no one's opened in a decade. She looked at him then, really looked, and said nothing. Leon's voice softened, almost to a whisper. You found something, didn't you? Silence stretched between them like wire pulled too tight. Then she said it. I spoke to Charles Avery. His jaw twitched. She leaned forward slightly. He told me what Drew found. About Unit H. About the offshore laundering buried in the compliance streams. About the leak he tried to make before the accident. Leon's voice dropped an octave. And what did you hope to find in Avery? The truth, she said. Something that made sense. And did you? Eden looked at him, really looked. His tie was slightly loosened. His watch shifted on his wrist, but his expression stayed frozen. Calm, careful. That was her answer. Yes, she said softly. I did. Leon moved to the window. I tried to stop it, he said. What happened to him? Her voice cracked. You were his boss. You were his friend. He turned, slowly. I was scared, Eden. He had everything to lose. I had the board. The investors. I thought I could protect him if I delayed it long enough. But he died, she said louder now. And you kept your job. The words hung in the air. And Leon didn't argue. Didn't deny it. Didn't speak. Eden stood. Her hands trembled, but she steadied them. There's one thing I still don't understand. He waited. The grant. The education fund. The name change approval. The therapy sessions I never knew how I could afford. Leon's eyes met hers. Was that you? She asked. The silence was deafening. And then, gently, he nodded. Her breath caught. Everything inside her recoiled and rushed forward at once. You've been watching me. I've been trying to make sure you lived, he said. No, she said, voice sharp. You were making sure your guilt stayed quiet. Leon's expression cracked, just slightly. The weight behind his eyes finally visible. I owed him, he said. And I owed you. You don't get to decide what I deserved, she snapped. She grabbed her notebook, turned toward the door, then stopped. Her voice shook now, but not from fear. From clarity. You didn't bury the truth to protect me. You buried it to protect yourself. And then she walked out. Leon didn't follow. He just stood there, surrounded by silence, watching the only person who ever made him feel like redemption was still possible disappear down the hallway. She didn't quit. Eden showed up the next morning, on time, silent, professional, like the confrontation never happened. But everything had changed. She no longer lingered by the archive shelves, no longer paused near the old partnership plaques. She answered Leon's questions directly, passed him files without meeting his eyes, and typed like her fingertips were armor. And Leon? He let her, because he didn't know what else to do. He'd built a world out of control, and now, The one person he wanted to protect from the beginning had slipped outside his reach. She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She just cut him out. It was worse than anger. Anger meant she still cared. This was retreat. But retreat didn't mean surrender. Because while Eden stopped looking in the company's database, she had started looking somewhere else. In her brother's things. She hadn't opened the last box in over a decade. It had been sealed by an aunt she barely remembered and dragged through 3 cities for apartments and 6 years of denial. Now, it sat on her kitchen table, duct tape frayed, corners water-damaged, her hands trembling. She peeled it open slowly. Inside, old photos, report cards, a navy hoodie that still smelled like him, and a folder, manila, labeled in black ink. For her. Her breath caught. She opened it. Inside was a flash drive and a note. His handwriting. If you're reading this, it means I didn't come home. There's a folder labeled Ravenna. Inside is everything I found. But this isn't just about Ashford. It's about what they buried. Not money. Not just fraud. Something else. Something worse. I didn't tell Leon. I wanted to trust him. But I couldn't. Not fully. But I trust you. Drew. Eden didn't cry. She didn't move. She just sat there for a long, long time, holding the one thing she never expected to get back. Her brother's voice. That night, she copied the flash drive to her laptop. The folder opened slowly. Dozens of PDFs, redacted memos. Internal reports marked, do not distribute. And one file at the bottom. Time-stamped just days before the crash. Ashford Internal, personnel memo. She opened it and froze. The document was a list. Names, code tags, transaction IDs. Underneath, a paragraph flagged in red. Employee Drew Blake has flagged discrepancies tied to a charity front called Project Ravenna. Funds tied to this shell account show routing through overseas partners, including one registered to L. Ashford, not disclosed in board records. She scrolled further. Recipient, Eden Blake. Amount, $120,000 plus over 4 years. Designation, protective grant/off ledger. Her own name, and Leon's, on the same buried list. Her hands trembled as she read the last line, scribbled in Drew's handwriting at the bottom of the page. If she ever finds out this came from Leon, she'll never believe it was love. She stopped breathing, because suddenly none of it made sense. Not just the silence, not just the cover-up, but why Leon had paid for her life. Why he'd watched from a distance. Why he hadn't told her. Why he looked at her like he'd already lost her before she ever walked into his office. And worst of all, why her brother thought Leon had feelings he never spoke aloud. The following morning, Eden didn't go to the office. She didn't log in remotely. Didn't call HR. Didn't file anything. She simply disappeared. Leon noticed the moment the clock hit 7:03 and her desk remained empty. Coffee wasn't on the warmer. No messages flagged. No background rustle beyond the glass. He didn't panic. Not outwardly. But inside, something fractured. Because she wasn't angry anymore. She was gone. And there was nothing left between them now but what hadn't been said. Leon sat at his desk for nearly an hour before he opened the drawer he hadn't touched in 12 years. Inside, a sealed envelope. Unmarked, yellowing at the edges. No name on the front. He remembered the day it arrived. The week after Drew's funeral. Hand-delivered by someone from legal. Drew's will had no formal requests. But the envelope came with a message. He left this behind. Said it was for you. If ever. Leon had never opened it. Because he'd been too much of a coward to see what Drew had left him. Now, with Eden gone, it felt like the last chance to face whatever truth was left to break. He opened it with steady hands. The handwriting was familiar. Rushed. Unfiltered. Leon, if you're reading this, I'm not here. I wish I could say this in person, but you and I both know how we are. We don't say things when they matter. We only feel them after. I knew you wouldn't protect me. Not really. But I didn't hate you for it. You were built for preservation. For survival. You were always going to pick the machine over the man. But she wasn't. Eden was the only thing I ever got right. And if you did nothing else in this life, I needed you to get that part right too. You don't owe me silence. Or guilt. Or legacy. You owe her a clean slate. Not as penance, but as a promise. You want to disappear. You want to fix it in secret, like you always do. But if you ever want peace, really want it, tell her the truth. Not what you did. Why you didn't stop me. That's what she'll never understand. Until you explain it. Drew. Leon didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, holding the paper. And in the silence of the penthouse, the past folded itself into a single, staggering truth. He hadn't failed Drew because of greed. He had failed him because he hadn't believed in anything as much as Drew had believed in her. And now, it might be too late to make that right. Eden sat at her kitchen table, the flash drive still open on her laptop. But her eyes weren't on the files. They were on the last note Drew had left her. Not the documents, not the warning, just a scrap of paper folded inside the folder labeled Ravenna. If he ever tells you the truth, the real truth, and you still want to walk away, then I'll finally rest. She didn't know what to do. Her whole life had been rebuilt on the ashes of that silence. Now, the fire was lit again, not by betrayal, but by something worse. Complicated love. She stood, grabbed her coat, and stepped out into the city, not to run, but to listen, because part of her still wanted answers, and a much quieter part still wanted to hear them from him.